Alright guys, welcome back to F1 News. The Miami Grand Prix is just around the corner and multiple top teams are expecting to be able to extract more performance. Red Bull reckon there's even more to come from their RB19, but Mercedes say they should be in a much better spot this weekend, especially with their Imola upgrades coming relatively soon, with big changes that Lewis Hamilton will be very happy about. Very much enjoyed your thoughts in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. First of all, cool update here. The Festival of Speed in Goodwood this year confirmed that Sebastian Vettel will be there in attendance, driving some classic cars such as the 1993 McLaren, so some really cool stuff there, but all the teams are now in Miami. Quick update on Red Bull for you guys. First of all, Max Verstappen might not be too happy about this. They're bringing back what they did, was it 2017 in Kota, where they had the drivers come out to some music. They're bringing back pre-race driver introduction ceremonies. Now, I don't know if this is kind of like every driver goes up one by one, like it's at a darts match and they play some walk-on music. Honestly, like, please, I hope that it does happen, to be fair. It'd be good content. But it would be a shambles, I imagine. You guys might have seen, right, that in Baku, the drivers or the pit lane opens 10 minutes earlier, which meant that there was additional time. The drivers were sitting around not really doing anything. The reason why that was the case is in preparation for Miami and potentially other races to come with a pre-race introduction. So I don't know what this is going to look like. Again, it's another step towards the glitz and the glam, the show, as opposed to the quality of the racing, but that's what Formula 1 likes to do nowadays, even though Toto Wolff made the point a couple of days ago. Let's focus on making the racing better first before we deal with stuff like this in various different ways they could potentially approach that. Also, a Helmut Marko bomb from Red Bull confirming that Adrian Newey's contract has indeed been extended. The extension of the contract with Adrian Newey shows that we continue to build on continuity and that we have an extremely pleasant working atmosphere. Remarkable actually to think. I mean, he's been with Red Bull for 17 years. I believe his first job in Formula 1 was in something like 1980. We're going back 40 plus years. And that was before Fernando Alonso was even born. So that just shows kind of the tenure here of Adrian Newey, that he's been designing cars before Alonso pretty much was born. Also an update here from AMUS on the possibility of Red Bull's top guy, or one of their top guys, Enrico Balba, leaving to go to Ferrari. They're reporting this is actually false and he is not the man. So there's two individuals that are rumoured to be going. We talked about yesterday that this guy was meant to be one of them. The other was unclear. Now both of them are unclear once again. So interesting storyline. Still, we believe that both are very influential in the Red Bull design. Ferrari would, I suppose, be, well, pleased to have them, but maybe this isn't the man to depart, and it would be a pretty big, loss for Red Bull. He's effectively, well, he's their head of aero, right? He's their third in command. From an aerodynamics perspective, and has helped introduce, I'm sure, this Baku upgrade that Red Bull just came up with, that apparently was worth 0.3 of a second. We heard these rumours ages ago now that they were going to extract 0.3 from these new upgrades, but on track they only got the results of about 1.5 of a second upgrades. Now, I imagine part of this was just the fact that they had one setup session, right? They had one practice session. All the teams struggle with this on the Friday when they have, especially when you've got new parts on the car, to figure out what your setup should be in 1 hour. And in Mercedes' case, Hamilton had an issue, so they had like maybe half an hour really to compare the two setups the drivers went for. So it's always tricky to get the right setup. Red Bull brought their upgrades, but they didn't produce quite the benefit they were hoping for, which means that they probably will see the full extent of that in Baku, which means they probably will see the full extent of that in Miami. So we might have to expect here Red Bull to be even better in Miami than they were in Baku, which is definitely a bit of a concern. But Sector 2 in Baku rewards mechanical grip. The load deriving from the service and aero is more significant in Miami, so there'll be even better evaluation and optimization of these Red Bull upgrades. With only one practice session, it was tricky, but you've also got to consider the fact that it was the same for the other teams. And also this was an interesting part of the article as well, suggesting that the Red Bull guys will develop this car up until Silverstone, and then after that they will just focus on next year's car, which is, to be honest, expected. I thought they even might call it a day earlier than that, to be honest. With this RB19, they could probably leave it as it is with no upgrades for the rest of the year, and they'd still win almost all the races, to be honest, barring various mechanical and other issues, right? I know there's been some discussions about Sergio Perez, given that he's getting pretty close to Verstappen. Will he turn up to Miami and have mechanical failure? Obviously there's been some jokes about it, but yeah, their plan is, due to the restrictions they have, to stop development on this year's car at Silverstone. That's, not even at the summer break. That's barely halfway through the season, which is understandable, but that's their plan, because by doing so, they can effectively forget that these cost cap penalties ever even happened and move on to next year with both championships in hand. So that's the plan from Horner & Co. The issue is, though, will we actually get to see a title fight this year? Hopefully we do. Sergio Perez says, without the issues we had in Melbourne, we should be leading the championship. It's very interesting interesting, actually, that there's, I think, understandably, a divide in part at the Red Bull camp. We saw the other day, right, when Perez won the Grand Prix, when, Perez was kind of talking to his team, saying, we're still in the fight here type thing. He's not talking about we, Red Bull, are in the fight against Aston or Ferrari or Mercedes. He's talking about we, as in me and my engineers, are in the fight against Max and his engineers. And then Horner comes on the radio to Max and says, Perez got a bit lucky there, like, don't worry, we'll get him next time type thing. So it is very interesting how that dynamic works internally at Red Bull. But it's expected, right? Sergio Perez knows this season is his best ever chance to win the World Drivers' Championship, right? And given a few reliability things that fall his way and don't fall Verstappen's way, there's very much a possibility this season of that to occur. So it's interesting. I don't think it'll happen. I think Miami will be a key test when we see, non-street tracks. Let's see how it goes for Perez. And also, will there be any threats from behind? Because I think Perez is a driver where if he's kind of stuck in a battle towards the front in the top 5, top 6, he's going to struggle a bit more than Verstappen is in those circumstances. But if it's just a straight out shootout with the two massively fastest cars up front, Perez can hold his own against Verstappen in those situations on certain tracks. So I think that's how we'll have to see here. But Hamilton and Mercedes, they're of course going to try and make a fight back. Here's Hamilton in the simulator getting ready for Miami. And he mentioned to media after Baku that he is effectively counting down the days until their Imola upgrade package, which is meant to take them in the right direction. There's been some mixed reports from Mercedes how powerful it's going to be. But one of the key changes they're looking to make is definitely in terms of the seating position of the driver and whether they can change that in Hamilton's favour, which is what they're planning to do over the coming races. But first of all, I wanted to share what they think about Miami, how good they could be here. Definitely as a circuit, it's more Melbourne kind of based than it is Baku based. It's more front limited. Certainly the first sector, all the sweeping corners, that's a more, front limited section where the front tyres are the ones stretched their limits. The Mercedes seems to be better in those corners than it is in the kind of acceleration zones. Let's say out of the tricky kind of end of that lap towards the end of sector 2, that's where it's more of an acceleration zone onto the back straight. That's where you might expect an Aston or a Red Bull to be stronger. But in the first sector, Mercedes should be, you would think, relatively competitive. Depends how they decide to go with their setup though, how they balance their straight line speed with their rear wing angle and the rest of the setup decisions. But Toto Wolff also says in Baku, they were very far from their optimal setup window. So he reckons there's more performance to come anyway. And Mike Elliott here says that the track will suit them better anyway. So it might push them once again ahead of Aston and Ferrari rather than behind them as they were in Baku and at the start of the season in Bahrain. Still though, going to be no chance to catch Red Bull this weekend.
Do we think Miami will suit our car, and can we challenge Ferrari and Aston Martin? Well, I think that's always a really difficult question to answer, because I think when you look at our cars, they're actually fairly close in terms of performance. In Melbourne, we looked probably a little bit quicker than Aston Martin and Ferrari. In Baku, we looked a little bit slower. In terms of the sort of circuit layout, I'd say Miami's a bit more like Melbourne. You might think, okay, well, that's good for us, and it is good for us. But like Baku, Miami's also been resurfaced. So until we get there, until we run on the track, it's going to be hard to know exactly what we're going to find. It's going to be hard to know how we're going to optimise the setup and what level of performance we're going to have relative to our competition. So in some ways, we'll just have to wait and see.
The other piece here, which is very interesting, confirmation from Toto Wolff about the cockpit positioning. If you guys have followed this story for a while now, you'll know that the Mercedes W14 has the furthest forward cockpit position of any team. We can see that compared to the total length of the car, the Mercedes is far further forward from driver positioning than the other cars. The Red Bull actually has the driver position furthest back of anyone. The Ferrari and the Aston are also kind of, a little bit farther forward, but the Red Bull is definitely further rearward than any other car on the grid, and you would imagine they understand something there, right? Hamilton has made the point that being near the front of the car feels like you're sitting on the front wheels, and it makes it very difficult to feel what's happening at the rear of the car, to understand how much grip you have back there, and just understand to its fullest extent how it's going. Now, George Russell doesn't seem to have too much of an issue with this. That was the statement here from Toto Wolff, that, George is pretty relaxed about the seating position. For Lewis, it is important, so we're trying to find the right compromise. And as he says, we're going to change the position, optimize the car, and make sure the drivers sit in a good place. Now, how they're going to achieve this is somewhat unclear, because they're not going to introduce a new chassis. So how do they push the driver back a little bit further? Because if you push the driver back further, then, there's electronics behind you, there's an engine behind you, there's things to think about there in terms of the way the car is structured. And they obviously made this decision for a reason, possibly because of the zero pods and making the airflow properly. So it's not exactly a quick fix. And Toto Wolff did say that in an ideal world, if they had unlimited money as they used to do, they would just bring a new chassis, an entirely B-spec version of the car, and that's what they would do. But with the cost cap in place, they can't do that. So how are they going to kind of change the seating position for Hamilton's preferences going forwards? Somewhat difficult to figure that out. We'll see, I suppose, whether that will come in Imola, whether that will come in Spain or even Silverstone afterwards. That is the current debate that's being had, but it will be interesting to see because Aston Martin reckon they're going to make further progress as well in Miami. Also, Ferrari should be okay there, but Aston reckon they're going to be stronger than Ferrari, especially in the race because of tyre degradation. If it's hot and everything, the Ferrari might suffer with. And there's going to be other challenges as well. Even Alpine were confident that their upgrades, I mean, we didn't get to really see their upgrades in action too much in Baku because their car was having a nightmare all the weekend, as were their drivers. But apparently their upgrades overperformed, as in they gave more downforce than expected. And they reckon that was a 0.3 of a second upgrade. So maybe Alpine could be competitive, but every time Alpine say they're going to be competitive, they have an absolute stinker next time out. So we'll see if that happens again. But speaking of Ferrari and potential tyre degradation, might not be so much of an issue if it rains, because apparently in qualifying and the race, now of course as soon as I mention this, it's now not going to rain. It's always the same thing that happens at the Grand Prix weekends, right? That they mention all the rain's on the horizon and then it never arrives. So, I've probably not done anyone a favour here, but it would be nice if it rains. And, there's been some reports, people have looked into the reports, and they reckon in just a few days' time, it is scheduled to potentially rain pretty heavily during maybe Saturday, but certainly on Sunday. And if that was the case, it's good and bad, right? Because if it actually is severe rainfall, you know what the FIA will do? They'll just call off the race. I mean, we've had some disasters the last couple of years, Spa, Suzuka recently, of course, in recent memory. But a light helping of rain would help spice up the weekend, because I don't want another Baku. If there was a rain at Baku, it would have been way more interesting, right? So hopefully we get something like that coming relatively soon. But very much enjoyed to hear your thoughts in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new. Take care, and I'll see you next time.